Okay, we've started up for the day, and what I've got up is the study guide. Um, actually, we're right where we left off yesterday, which was in the middle of doing some looking at some of the techniques in the initiative horizon. Before we continue on along, any thoughts, comments, or questions on what we did yesterday? Nope, all comfortable? Okay. Um, I also looked at the study questions in the beginning of the study guide, and they're somewhat similar to the questions that actually the IIBA has put out. They have a self-assessment that you can do for the course, and it's just, about a dozen questions or so to give you an idea of where you are. And I think the same thing is true here with these questions. I don't recall that they came from the Agile extension. They might have, but it's just some brief questions to give you an overall idea of whether you feel like you're ready to take on the certification. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to go through those before the end of the day, just to kind of get a collective wisdom about where you guys are with this. But for the time being, let's jump back into the techniques at the initiative horizon, where we left.
So Tom,
Yep.
sorry to interrupt. I have
No.
a quick question regarding
Sure.
yesterday's discussion. So I was also going through some questions also, and I also gone through the main Agile extension which IIBA provides, and then I was also obviously
Mhm.
looking at the AAC study guide.
Yep.
Only one question which I have, and this is only because obviously when you try to answer a multiple choice question, I mean they are trying to, I mean, obviously have only one right answer. So it's specifically for the like techniques. I think in the IIBA Agile extension, um, under initiative horizon,
Hmm.
I do obviously there are a set of techniques mentioned, and I will assume whatever is mentioned under initiative horizon. If obviously a question comes, what are the techniques, or like if there is a technique mentioned, is it applicable to initiative or something like that? So I would suppose that's the guide or the list that anything under initiative horizon will definitely, those are the activities which we can only perform under initiative horizon. So specifically a question about purpose alignment model. I was trying to see that this is mentioned as a technique under Initiative Horizon and IIBA guide, the Agile extension. But versus like when I checked the Adaptive US IIBA AC guide, I think it is not mentioned in the Initiative Horizon. So just to maybe check how should we comprehend the guide versus the Agile extension from IIBA.
Okay. I think one of the things, the premise that you put forth is not particularly, is not completely accurate. The techniques, in terms of the techniques, there are multiple techniques that could be used at multiple horizons. Okay.
Right, right.
So it's not a unique thing that in this particular horizon, these are the only techniques that we would use, or for a particular technique, this is the only horizon that we would use it at. In
Mhm.
fact, I think there probably is, both in the study guide and in the Agile extension, there is a matrix that lists the techniques and kind of indicates which horizons those techniques might be applicable to. Um, I suspect what happened in the Agile extension is that the IIBA listed all of the techniques that could apply, or that they feel could apply at any horizon, so that they would repeat the technique in both in the strategy horizon, the initiative horizon, and the delivery horizon, if they felt that it was applicable. And my guess is that in putting together the AAC study guide, what Adaptive did was to look for the primary point and try not to replicate the techniques at multiple horizons. I think the goal with the AAC study guide was to cut down on some of the verbiage of what's in the Agile extension while retaining the meatier content of the Agile extension. And so what you would find in the Agile extension is that they might have the same technique, but they would describe it just a little bit differently in terms of its application, depending on the horizon that you're talking about. But a lot of these things, it's solely a matter of this is the level of detail that you would have to go in at this particular horizon, and really the technique is the same. I mean, there are some techniques like brainstorming where you could use that at any of the horizons, but the topics that you would be brainstorming would be slightly different or significantly different for the strategy horizon than they would be for the initiative or delivery horizons. So, and that adds a slight level of complexity to the examination, because when they start talking about because the sections of the examination are certainly not identified, so you don't really know unless they specifically state it that they're proposing a question from the perspective of a specific horizon. They may or may not mention that they're talking about the strategy horizon, but what they might do is to word a question such that the scenario that you're talking about should be apparent that you're talking at the strategy level. Ergo, you want to be answering the question from the perspective of the strategy level. That's a little bit of a complication to the examination, but it's something they're also pretty clear about those kinds of things when they word the questions, even though they don't say the strategy level. They'll give you a clear indication that what they're talking about is the strategy level.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep, makes sense.
Okay. So storyboarding. Does anybody do storyboarding? Has anybody done storyboarding?
Yeah, I've used it a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I found it pretty helpful.
Yep.
Yeah, we have also used it.
Okay. So it's just kind of drawing a basic picture, a basic map of how your solution is going to be dealt with by your stakeholders, and the key to doing this is clearly not to try and be as detailed or as as high fidelity as you might think as you go further on down the road. It's really a higher level technique to get basically a rough picture of what you're trying to do. Okay. Worry about the steps to create. Yep. Strengths and limitations. Yep. It kind of gives you a picture, and again gives people something visual to be able to work with. Visual presentations are good things. One of the things that I sometimes find with BAs and with organizations is that they choose a technique as opposed to basically saying we may need to present information differently for different stakeholders, for different groups of stakeholders. And so with all of these techniques, you're going to see some significant amount of overlap towards this is a visual technique, and that doesn't mean that we should not describe these things or provide the same information in text format. It's just this is something that supports the text format, or the text format is something that supports the visual format, and you should be equipped, and you need to be willing to build these things, build these pictures in addition to doing textual things. Again, I find that a lot of organizations say, well, we have the text, why do we need the pictures? Or we have the picture, why do we need the text? And they fail to understand that it's because people learn things differently, people consume information differently. So there's value on both sides. Visual techniques such as storyboarding make it a bit easier for stakeholders to interact. They can consume the information more readily, and because it's not down to a full level of detail, they may expose the detail as they start to look at the at the storyboards. This will provoke discussion. And in terms of the limitations, obviously when we're doing storyboarding, you're doing basically low fidelity kinds of things. So you're really not focusing on the design elements as much as the content, and that can sometimes be a little disconcerting for some stakeholders. I would argue that you probably should be doing storyboarding kinds of things before you start doing things like developing prototypes, so that it's not a jarring change. But that's that's something that is you need to be aware of when you're working with these. And in each of these things, it's good to have this, and the Agile extension puts out these things to look at assessing the various techniques in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. Spikes, we've mentioned spikes. I mentioned spikes in that, as I said, when I first started doing Scrum things, I was focused on, like many people, I would argue, like most people, well, we're supposed to be delivering value to the customer, and not realizing that, okay, there's a time that we have to be able to look back or to delve into things and not necessarily be focused on we're producing the product, we're producing a customer-facing product. And so there is this technique called spikes, where you're allowed and encouraged to take time to say, okay, here we need to do some work, we need to do some research work, we need to do some investigation on something that we'll implement downstream, we'll do later, but right now we're going to take a chunk of time to do this, and not say, well, we always have to be, our delivery team always has to be writing code. There are different types of spikes depending on what we're trying to determine. You can take spikes for basically doing decomposition of story decomposition. If you find that you have a story that, as you start to work on it, it's a little bit more complicated than you thought initially. If there's more scenarios that need to be worked on in order to fully deliver the feature, then you can take time to say, okay, we need to decompose this. You can take time to decompose things down into a better, more refined task list for doing the feature. That's what this is all about. You can use spikes to help you do your backlog refinement. And there are basically 3 different types of spikes that they've identified: functional, technical, and exploratory. And they allow the team to basically refine some of the work that they need to do. It says on their strengths that you can help teams to build rapport. I guess I would argue that this is internally, I want to say internally, so that it gives the development team a chance to, or the developers on the team, a chance to kind of hone in on what they do or what they need to do. And the same way you could look at, a spike that's designed to help refine the backlog, where it helps to integrate the analyst on the team, or the person with the heaviest analysis background, to kind of do the thing that they do, and the same thing is true from the testing perspective, where you might take a spike to say, okay, this is a particularly complex story. I'm going to need a lot. There are a lot of scenarios to deal with, so I'm going to need to take some specific time, and we as a team are going to need to take some specific time to develop the tests that we're going to need to do for this. Okay. Retrospectives. Retrospectives are something that are really quite common in the Agile environment. Some of my experience is that people look at these as kind of lessons learned, and we used to say when I was working doing BA stuff more full time, it was like lessons exposed, because the organization that I was working with, we were very good at identifying things that went wrong or went right, what you would do in a retrospective. But we weren't all that good at making those decisions that say, how do we have to use that information? It was just like, well, if we do this, we somehow document that we did our lessons learned, and we check that off, we check that box off, and never really practically implemented those kinds of things. That's something that I think that there are a number of organizations that are not particularly good at, so it's something to be aware of, to make sure that you actually are doing something with the information that you get from these retrospectives, so that they continue to be valuable. How are your experience with retrospectives from your respective environments? Do you see value or pitfalls in what you guys do?
I think the key to them is to make sure that we focus on the subject at hand. If it's a iteration retrospective, not to get into trying to complain about general processes and those sorts of things. If you're going to have it, we had a problem with that early on when we were doing this at the Royal, and while retrospectives are supposed to be an opportunity to talk about processes as well as the iteration, we made sure that we had those broken out during the retrospective. We did not, so that we didn't just get stuck. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to try to have an agenda for them. Don't just go in ad hoc, because if you do, you're just going to open it up to crop session.
Mm-hmm. Yep. One of the things that you'll find emphasized in the Agile extension is the idea that in doing retrospectives, a key component is creating trust amongst the team. And so you want to frame the retrospective precisely as this is not a bitch or blame session. It's to strengthen the entire team, to strengthen ultimately the entire organization, to understand that in any given circumstance there are likely to be things that we have done well, and we should embrace those and celebrate those. There are likely to be things that we have not done so well, and we should be looking to identify those things and basically repair those things or fix those things. But not that our primary goal is to point the finger at who we feel was responsible for us not doing the best job that we possibly could have. That's that whole concept is something that is also can be difficult in an Agile environment, the goal being to have the team function as a team and not function as a group of individuals. And sometimes, in in the real world, that's a little bit difficult to do. I think culturally, organizations have to really look at that and really embrace the idea that this is about the organization and it's not about the individual. I and that sometimes flies in the face of the way organizations tend to function. Everybody's because um, even things like compensation are somehow based on individual merit, unless the organization has made an active choice and an active commitment to say we're going to treat this team as a team, and that means that if the team succeeds, everybody on the team succeeds, and if the team does not succeed or is less successful, that everybody on the team, I want to say, suffers from that lack of success, and not, um, you know, it just focuses people on the idea that I need to do my job, but I need to make sure that everybody else can do their job and is doing their job. Uh, and that fits very well into the agile paradigm, and retrospectives are a place where that can be reinforced if they're put forth with the idea that this is to improve the team. Mhm. This is yeah, that's taken us through. This is just an overall, more of an overall assessment of what the initiative horizon is about. So we've kind of covered all of the techniques for the initiative horizon, and the study guide will take you through again applying the principles of agile development as they apply to the initiative horizon. On that happy note, if there are no questions, we'll proceed on to our delivery horizon. Thoughts before we move on to the delivery horizon? Okay, we'll put that puppy away for the time being, and we'll go to the delivery horizon. And well, here we go. Okay, I've Okay, so the delivery horizon is where we're really starting to talk about the actual production of product. This is where the nuts and bolts of development and testing happen, um, and it's the outcome of or the output of the delivery horizon is really the products that we're delivering to our customers. And uh, in this horizon, we're looking at building things. We're looking at identifying potential problems. We're looking at um, taking advantage of the understanding that we should have developed or reinforced even in the initiative horizon. This is where a lot of the decisions should have been made, and it really is into the nuts and bolts of now implementing those decisions. Um, it focuses on the product backlog, which in theory was developed to a certain extent at the initiative horizon, but probably not to the complete extent that we know exactly what needs to be done in any given iteration. It's also um, the time when we're actually starting to try and understand how well we've done what we're doing, and making sure that the product that we produce coming out of the delivery horizon is usable for the customers. Have any of you seen this graphic before? This is a fun graphic that I saw a long time ago, that covers sort of the reality of the way things are built in the real world. There's the ideal of, yes, we understand everything and we all agree and we're all on the same page. And yet, when we look at the outcome of what we've done from different perspectives, you get a graphic that looks something like this. Where, has anybody seen this one, or is this a new one to you?
I've seen something similar to this, but like a buffalo,
Hmm.
which is having a trunk, and they
Ah,
actually wanted an elephant, and then it turned out like a buffalo with a trunk.
yep, yep,
So I think that is similar to this one.
yep, yep. And this is it's a fun kind of graphic, and it's something that even though it's humorous in a way, it points out that we often don't have a completely shared understanding of what we're talking about, and that can cause problems. Okay, more from
Tom,
yep.
sorry to interrupt you. So
No,
just I was thinking of the weekend also. I mean, so I want to take everyone else's opinion. Like obviously we have been doing the backlog refinement. Everyone would have obviously done in their profiles. So what kind of tools you have used, like normally, and how is your opinion about that? Like obviously. There are different ways to do it, like taking an Excel sheet, put all the items. You can do sorting there, but I mean there are different tools also which are like really good for refinement. So like I want to see like what's the best practice, or maybe Tom, as per your opinion, how you
um,
guys have been doing.
I think my answer to that question is going to be it depends. It depends on
Mm-hmm.
your organization. Um, any of the tools that are out there and available can work to do the job, and I think it just becomes a question of is this something that is this a tool that we want to adopt and put into play, or how much time and money and effort do we want to put into this, as long as the job is getting done, and people are not feeling uncomfortable about it. I think you can use anything. I don't think that there's a magic, any sort of magic bullet in these things. It, you know.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, in my experience, like we were like business was more comfortable using like kind of Excel sheet kind of things, and then
Hmm.
company changed their direction. They come up with a tool. So I had a hard time like having business use that tool. So yeah, that's just kind of
Yeah, and I think that comes down when somebody in the organization who is not responsible for this on a day-to-day basis and not really all that keyed into it, makes a decision and says, "Oh well, this is a really cool tool." The other side to
yeah.
that, though, in their defense, is that sometimes, people are just reluctant to go in a different direction, to give a new tool an opportunity to do what it does. For the most part, the tools that are developed not only to do, they focus on the job, but they in general, people build tools with the idea of, oh, we can do more. You can do a lot of things with Excel spreadsheets. You have to be pretty Excel savvy to do some things with Excel spreadsheets. And so what people have done is to say, well, we can build a tool that can more easily do the same kinds of things that we could do with an Excel spreadsheet. And this becomes a real balancing act, because the people who are developing the product continue to say, how can we enhance this and make this more valuable, in theory, without really, um, you know, without saying, you know what? We're at a point in time where we don't need to add any more functionality to this tool. This tool does everything that most of our users are going to feel comfortable with and to even want. And this is, you can think back to things. My favorite hobby horse on this happens to be Microsoft Word, where I've been using Microsoft Word for forever and consider myself a fairly savvy user of Microsoft Word, and yet I would argue that if I use even 10% of the capability of the product, I'm probably using a lot. That is just so overloaded with functionality that it's, there's just no way that I'm ever going to need it or want it or use it. And yet Microsoft puts it out there because they say, well, Tom, you're not the only one who's using Microsoft Word. You may use 10 functions, and other people may use 10 functions, but there'll be 10 different functions than you use. So, that means we have 20 functions, and if we multiply that all out to try and be all things to all people, we have this massive tool. I think the same thing is true of tools in the Agile environment, that you need to understand where your organization is, where your people are, and then seek to implement a tool that will satisfy their needs and not necessarily force them to expend more effort and energy to get the same job done. Okay. Obviously, at the delivery horizon, we're looking at picking up the pieces that we have, user stories that need to be implemented, making sure that we have the appropriate amount of information in order to implement those stories, and then breaking those stories down into a task list that says, in order to do this, these are the discrete tasks that we need to perform in order to implement this particular feature. And this is all classic Agile development, talking about basically working, and as you work, exposing what you're doing to your business users, to try and keep them in the loop and keep them feeding back on what you're doing. One of the dangers with this, and it kind of depends a lot on the organization and the people, how agile they are, is understanding that this is always a building process and an iterative process. And so when you're dealing with this, you want to be focusing on what have we accomplished, and not what didn't we do. You need to be mindful of what's not done yet, so that when a stakeholder raises a question about that, you can say, yes, we just haven't gotten there yet. That's the direction that we're going in. The goal at this particular point in time is to look at what we've done and assess how well we have done what we've done, not what have we not done yet. Okay. Invest criteria, that's going to be one we'll spend a little bit of time on. This is standard user story syntax. As a user or a customer, I want to do something to achieve a certain goal. And these can be expanded and extended. This is the basic syntax for a user story. You can also add things like conditions to this. As a customer, under certain conditions, I want to do these things so that I can achieve the goal that I was trying to achieve. Okay. And this is just a statement of the user story. Obviously, user stories are supported by acceptance criteria, which is where some of the actual business scenarios will come out and say, how is this particular statement implemented under certain conditions. Let's see, invest criteria. Do we have kind of? This is just. Yeah, the key here, again, when we're talking about well done agile development is just in time, so that you need enough information, enough detail about a user's story in the backlog to determine whether or not you can move forward with that particular user's story, but you don't need all of the detail. And the problem with a lot of this is if you again try to be more predictive, um, and try and get that detail in play, you wind up um, potentially expending a lot more effort once you choose to work on a particular user story. So the key there is to maintain your prioritization in your backlog so that you're only taking things really off the top of the pile. And off the top of the pile is where you need the greatest level of detail. And then obviously once you take something off the top of the pile to implement it is when you need to be sure you have complete detail in order to be able to do it. But be aware that if you spend too much time refining your user stories before they're prioritized up for work, you face the prospect of having to do rework when you bring them on, or to basically waste the work that you did previously. Okay. Maintaining healthy backlogs. Again, this is all. Oh, Alina's arrived. Good morning, Alina. Um, this is all standard agile type development. It's just you have a prioritized list of what you're trying to do, and one of your responsibilities as a delivery team is to basically be sure that you're always generating enough information to keep to keep your team busy, keep your team productive, but not generating too much information before you need it. Successful delivery is issues, and this is a lot of this is about in the Scrum environment, daily stand-up meetings. It's raising issues to the surface as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible, and resolving those issues as efficiently as possible. Um, Part of a big part of, and I'm finding this is a bit repetitive for me, and I'm thinking that given most of your background for you guys, a lot of this is repetitive information for you too. So if that's true, or if you feel like I'm just glossing over a lot of this stuff that I should be spending a little bit more time on, please jump in and say, okay, can we slow down and take a look at this a little bit more in depth. I think the delivery horizon is probably the horizon that anyone who has spent a significant amount of time with agile development is most familiar with, and this is basically the bread and butter of doing agile development in terms of the AAC and the agile extension. I think what has really is really the key there is understanding the multiple horizons and the relationship between the multiple horizons. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay. Because I look at this and say, I look at this information, I say these are these are the slides that from from the beginning of Agile development. This is what has been hammered into people's heads about Agile delivery, and so I may be tending to just kind of feel like everybody knows all of this stuff. It is about being adaptive and learning. We've already, mentioned retrospectives in the initiative horizon, and they're probably even more critical at the delivery horizon, or more commonplace at the delivery horizon, where in most flavors of Agile, we're talking about specifically dedicating time at the end of an iteration to do a retrospective, and so these are common techniques that should be implemented in an Agile environment, and the goal is obviously to learn. The goal is to say, we need to adapt our processes, and we need to adapt the things that we're doing to better support what we're doing. So it all blends together. We're delivering a product, but at the same time, we're looking at how that piece of the product fits into the overall picture. We're looking at being mindful that this is a continuous stream of delivery, so that we've got to basically be keeping in mind, yeah, we're working on what we're working on right now, but in the back of our mind, we have to realize that we need to be preparing for the next thing that we're going to do, so that all of our efforts in a particular iteration can't just be focused on the product that we're producing in that iteration. There needs to be a certain amount of time that is dedicated and allowed to saying, yeah, but we need to be sure we've got, we're continuing to get information for our next iteration. And this is where you can have, where your team can actually focus on what they are good at, so that if you have an analyst, if you are the BA on your team, in the early part of an iteration is where a certain amount of your effort will be spent ensuring that the people who are going to be processing this information, the developers, the coders, actually have the information that they need to work on what is in the current iteration. And at the same time, as those folks are more satisfied with the information and can go do their job, then you can jump out and say, okay, my task at this point in time is to start to make sure that there's enough information available, so that when we move to the next iteration, we're ready to go there. And the same thing is true for the people who are on your team and responsible for doing testing. While they should be paying attention, while analysis, or while that making sure we have all the appropriate detail part of the iteration is there, and then while the developers are writing the code, the testers can and should be focused on making sure that they have the information that they need, and are prepared, so that when the code is written, they can efficiently and effectively test it. And so it becomes this balancing act of, there's always something that I can be doing in the context of an iteration, even if I'm not doing the quote job that that I normally do, which is to say, if I'm the analyst, I'm analyzing; if I'm the coder, I'm writing code; and if I'm the tester, I'm testing. It becomes something where you balance the other things that you need to do, not just your day job. At the delivery horizon, obviously, we are looking at product. And this is where the actual value to the customer is created and delivered, and that needs to be a primary focus. We need to keep thinking that what we're doing here is helping to improve the way our customers can do their job, and so for that purpose, we need to be constantly focusing on value that's being delivered as a part of our efforts. Um, and this can be a time where, depending again on the organization and the team, where the development side of the house, the IT side of the house feels like, okay, now we're doing our job. We need to go off and do our work. But in a truly successful agile environment, what you need to do is to be sure that you are maintaining your contact and maintaining your involvement of your business people, and some of that is just the way you craft your tasks in your iteration, so that there's an awareness that you need to keep your product people, your business side people involved and active in the overall product. Uh, at the delivery horizon, obviously, it's there should be a good focus on what is currently being done. At the same time, the the business people can also be tweaked to say they should also be considering what's in the pipeline, and have they provided the appropriate level of detail for what's coming up in the pipeline, so that it becomes a continuum. There's always something new that's ready to go into the pipeline while things are being worked on. The delivery horizon is about day to day. It's this is what we're doing every day. It's the shortest term horizon, measured in weeks, as opposed to being measured in months. Again, there's varying levels that people work with this. Some teams are working towards almost continuous improvement, and so their time boxes become very short. Other teams will look at it and push them out. One of the things that you should be mindful of in this is that you should be consistent about your time boxing. So you shouldn't be saying, well, this sprint or this particular iteration is only going to be 2 weeks long, but the next one is going to be 4 weeks long, and then we'll go back to 2 weeks, and then we've got a really short one that is going to be 1 week. That's not a recipe for a successful agile delivery. You should really be crafting a process that says we can always figure out how much work we can get done and how much work we can deliver in a consistent time frame. Obviously, there are going to be times when you may not be able to do that, but you want to minimize that. You really want to be working on some sort of consistent schedule, and making your team aware that, or making your team and your business stakeholders aware that that's what you're doing. You're setting a basically a 2 week alarm clock that says, when the alarm goes off, this is where we're going to be, this is what we're going to deliver, and that's how we're going to put together our process, so that every time the alarm goes off, we know that we've got to deliver something. This helps this helps your whole organization, and certainly your agile team, where if you can deliver things consistently in a timely manner, you start to develop trust amongst the people who are not involved with you day to day. The greater organization understands that, okay, every X number of weeks we're going to get some new functionality to play with, or we're going to get a report or some information from the delivery team that says this is where we are, this is what we've accomplished, this is what we said we were going to accomplish, and this is what we did accomplish. Hopefully, ultimately, in the long term, you get so that those two statements or those two things are relatively, consistently equivalent in the early stages, and in the early stages of a project that may be a bit more difficult to do, but over the long haul you need to develop that consistency so that the people who are not involved with you on a day-to-day basis can know what to expect and can start to develop the trust for you to allow you to do your job the way you need to do it. To have that confidence in you that they can say, I don't have to be watching what's going on all the time, or I don't have to be guessing what I'm going to see, that the agile delivery team is going to tell me what they're going to give me, and by God, they're going to give it to me. This develops trust across the entire organization, and it basically empowers ultimately your delivery team to do their jobs to the best of their ability. Okay. Interesting that the time frame continually shifts, and this is just about. Oops, let me go back there. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go previous. Yeah, in talking about the time frame shifting continuously, it's not that we keep moving things down the road. It's just that we're always looking at a time frame moving forward, so that it's we do things every 2 weeks, and we run on 2-week iterations, and so we're always looking at what's going to happen in the next iteration, the next 2 weeks. It's not that we're pushing things down the road and saying, well, we didn't get it done in this 2 weeks, so we're going to have to do it in the next 2 weeks. It's breaking things into smaller chunks to say, okay, this is what we can do in this time frame. Feedback and learning, again, this is about maintaining contact with your business partners, so that you're always delivering things to them or keeping them aware, and basically engaging them in the process, so that when, as a delivery team, you produce something, they have a responsibility. Once it's tested by your testing component, they have a responsibility to assess it and provide feedback on it. And those kinds of feedback loops are critical to the success of agile delivery. And as we've mentioned many times already, although the delivery horizon is focused on day-to-day kinds of things, it informs the initiative horizon, certainly, and it should also inform the strategy horizon, so that at a strategic level we understand how well we're doing towards achieving strategic goals. At the initiative level, we're able to say, we can be sure that we have things prioritized properly and sequenced properly, and based on what's coming out of the delivery horizon, we can adjust those things at those other two horizons, to maintain a holistic picture across the entire organization. Things can be formal or informal. You want to be sure that you're accomplishing the task of doing retrospectives, doing reviews, but it doesn't have to be a formal process. They can be more informal, depending on what really has been done and what really needs to be discussed. Agile development is not about checking off check boxes on a checklist. It's more about working together to make sure that we get the best possible product in the least possible time with the least expenditure of wasted effort. applying the agile principles to the delivery horizon. Um, See the whole. That's interesting because in the delivery horizon, a lot of the focus is on the little bits and pieces, and the whole idea here is to never lose sight of the whole picture. Although you're working on a small piece of it, a very detailed part of it, you need to remember and be aware that this fits into a bigger picture, and so you want to be saying, okay, well, here's this little thing that I'm building, but how does this advance the picture or advance my initiative forward? How does it fit into the bigger picture? And again, the focus back here, even at the delivery horizon, is we need to make sure that we're constantly aware of what's in the pipeline and is it ready to go? Is there enough work that when we complete our current iteration, we can transition relatively smoothly into the next iteration, and that goes back to it's all part of a bigger picture. Just taking a look here. Okay, we're early. We're moving along really quickly today. I think that's based on the fact again that this is a lot of kind of standard information. We're going to get to the end of the slides quite quickly, and that will give us a significant amount of time to look at the study guide and also to get into the questions that you know that are out there as a part of the package that you all have, and so we can spend a bunch of time on that. Thinking as a customer at the delivery horizon, this should be relatively easy to do. This is where the work that truly impacts the customer is being done, so that there should be almost an automatic idea of looking at the work we're doing from the perspective of a customer. That's just re-emphasizing this from the development perspective. Hopefully, by this point in time, we've got enough information to understand how what we're doing is going to impact the customer, and we've refined it well enough so that um, there's not a lot of opportunity for developers to go off on their own tangents and do things that they think will be really cool. The information should be solid enough so that they're given they have a specific task that they're trying to accomplish. And if they're doing anything in terms of writing cool code, it's to write cool code under the covers and not write cool new features or functions that are not what's expected. Uh, Keeping a focus on what I'm trying to do here is to build something for my customer and not something for me. Okay. Analyze to determine what's valuable. That's the statements that I just made previously support this. We need to be thinking as a delivery team in terms of, is this going to be something that is going to help the people that need to use this solution to do their job better, more efficiently, more accurately, more completely? Those are, those are the kinds of things that are going to be critical to the users of the solution. They're the things that people are going to appreciate and obviously ultimately are going to consider as valuable. This involves maintaining constant contact with your stakeholders so that they can feedback and they can look at what you've done and say, is this, um, is this going to make my job easier or better or more robust? And you can engage in discussions about that so that you can, you can refine what you're doing based on their feedback, and they're saying, well, yeah, this is good, but this would make this more valuable to me. Uh, you know, you, you this is the point in time where you can consider specific design parameters. You can be looking down as detailed as, are my screens readable? Um, do my actions proceed logically? Do I hit roadblocks with this? Those are the kinds of things that should be flushed out at this horizon. Evaluating the process value. Okay, this is heading into maintaining constant contact with people and across the team. Um, this is heading into retrospectives. I'm not sure why this slide is here because it's not. This is not one of the classic agile premises. We've got a couple more there, so hopefully we'll get to them in the next couple of slides. But again, I think that it's interesting that there's a question here that says, is the team happier? Because I think that that's a valuable question to ask. If people are satisfied and feeling, feeling rewarded by their work and feeling comfortable with their work, um, ultimately they're going to be more productive. A happier team probably produces higher than an unhappy team. Um, if we're doing things right, um, we should be anticipating questions and resolving questions before they surface. And if we're doing a proper level of detail and a proper level of analysis on the things that we're doing, we should be producing fewer defects. Um, Ultimately, a team is going to establish a consistent velocity. You want to be establishing a consistent velocity so that you can always anticipate better what needs to be done and what you're going to be able to do. The velocity, I think, can vary. Certainly, in the early part of a project, it can. In the early formation of a team, it can vary a bit wildly until people get comfortable. But as the team gets comfortable, there should be a smooth flow of items through the pipeline. You should be able to anticipate, pretty much what you can deliver. It's not that you necessarily will be able to deliver the same number of items. It's that you will be able to accurately assess and predict what you can deliver over the course of a certain amount of time, and you develop that consistency and that trust across the organization. Um, are we monitoring what's going on? Are we being truly adaptive about things? Are we looking at it and saying we've done at this horizon, we've done a retrospective, we determined that there was something that we wanted to change, that we're going to try and change for our next iteration, or we're going to adapt as a process going forward, and then coming back and assessing that and saying, we said we wanted to do this, did we actually do it, and did it make the difference that we thought it was going to make? So that it's a continuum. There's continual change, there's continual adaptation, not continual chaos, not continual disruption, but looking at the process, looking at the product, and saying, where are we with this? Are we proceeding along in a predictable manner that we can continue to do over the long haul? Ideally, in an agile environment, if you have a well-formulated process and a well-formulated team, they should be able to continue to deliver um, the value that is being put forth at the initiative horizon, they should be able to continue to deliver that almost continuously, and for a long period of time. Uh-oh. I've got next network connection difficulties. Are you guys, am I still clear, and are you still able to see what's going on? Okay.
Yeah.
That's weird. It looks like this is trying to reconnect. Oh no. Okay. Yep, there's somebody else. Okay. Okay, everybody's okay. Yeah, sometimes these things happen. I have relatively good connections, but sometimes things just happen. So, um, and again here, you want to want to be focusing on the team, how well the team is doing, and what's their impression of things. And because we have kind of a cross in most agile environments, we have cross-functional teams that include aspects from both the business side and the technical side. um, as a team, the team needs to be coming to the conclusion of what is important and valuable to the team as well as to the organization. Get real using example. Okay, we're back to the classic principles. Um, this is particularly, I like the idea of using examples for acceptance criteria. This is something where you can really, tweak your business users to say, or your solution users to say exactly what do you need to do and under what circumstances. This can be an area where I've mentioned before, where people are either a little bit reluctant to detail these kinds of things, or don't feel competent to detail these kinds of things, and yet they're so important to agile delivery. You need to be able to push your business stakeholders to say exactly what goes on here. What are you trying to accomplish? What different scenarios do you have that need to be covered and dealt with? Because for better or worse, if you're on the technical side of the house, you're not going to know your business users' jobs as well as they do, even if you're quite familiar with them, and even if you're quite well versed in what they do. There's always going to be things that the people who are doing it on a day-to-day basis all the time experience, and you need to be able to tweak them about those things to make sure that as many as possible of those things are covered. At the same time, you need to be able to look at things, and if you have an extensive list of things that need to be covered, you need to be sure that all of those things are really truly valuable. I know I said previously that I've experienced where business users want to focus on the exceptions as opposed to the rules, and it's very easy for them to be giving you all of the exceptions, and if it's going to take effort and expend resources to deal with those, you need to be sure that they're commonplace enough and they happen often enough that they do absolutely require to be addressed. So you're constantly looking at your acceptance criteria and saying, okay, have we got them all, and do they all make sense? Understand what's doable. Um, it's about getting the information that you need and determining that you have the resources, that you can do this, that there are no constraints that will stop you from doing these things, validating any assumptions that you've made before you start to go down the road of doing something, to be sure we're still doing what's right, to be sure we're still all agree that yes, this is what needs to be done and this is when we need to do it. Um, this is and accepting the fact that you may not be able to do everything. It may be the case that you're going to have to discuss with your business users whether or not you can do something. One of the nice things about doing Moscow prioritization, and I've seen this, and more recently was exposed to this, was the whole idea of must have, should have, could have, and won't have at this particular point in time. And if your environment and your team understands that a won't have can always be changed, not always, but can frequently be changed to, well, we didn't do it the last time, but now we have the resources available, now we have the information available, so it becomes, it moves out of that category of won't have it to now it could be one of the other priorities, and that's based on information and it's based on trust. At some point, you may have to make a decision that says this is a particular aspect or a particular feature that we simply won't have because we can't do it. It's not doable. And your team needs to be able to basically come to that consensus and come to that acceptance that there are some things that just simply can't be done, and you need to be mindful of those. Doable is what's doable at this particular point in time. Stimulate collaboration and continuous improvement. That's been the hallmark of every horizon. And it's particularly relevant at the delivery horizon because this is where you have a lot of collaboration, a lot of feedback. You need that to be sure that what you're actually ultimately going to deliver to your business partners is what they truly need. Um, Avoid waste. One of the things that I did mention on this is that if you have a well prioritized backlog and you have the appropriate level of detail in your backlog, it does promote the avoidance of waste. Doing things too early, getting too much detail for low priority items causes the potential for rework. I would argue that you should never throw out work or throw out detail that's available there, but you just need to realize that you don't need to focus on it. You don't need to refine it to its final level of detail when it's a low priority item, simply because there is the potential that it could change as it moves up the priority list and as the timeline goes along. So you just need to be mindful of having the appropriate level of detail at the appropriate time and at the appropriate horizon. Um, We've talked about this before, that at the strategy horizon, you don't really need to know the details of how things are going to be implemented. It's about from a high level perspective, can we achieve business value? It's not until you get to the delivery horizon that you really need to know the details of how something is going to be implemented. Even at the initiative horizon, it's a little bit higher level of detail. I know that I want to accomplish something. I know that this is specifically what I want to accomplish, but I'm not exactly sure how that's going to be implemented when it comes down to actually writing the code or developing the application. Okay. I like the statement that avoiding waste by maximizing the work not done. Always look for things that you shouldn't be spending time on, or be mindful of things that you should not be spending time on. those are going to be key to basically not wasting time. That takes us to the end of the slides for this particular segment. It is the last segment that we have to deal with. I'm going to suggest it's about 20 minutes after the hour. I'm going to suggest that we take a 15-minute break at this particular point in time, and then we'll go off into the study guide and basically looking at questions and wrapping up the entire the entire presentation. I, you know, it's possible we may wind up ending a little early today. That will be contingent on how well you guys feel we've accomplished what we need to accomplish. So at this point, I'm gonna shut us down for 15 minutes, and I'll see you in 15 minutes.